Welcome back and Assalamu alaikum to Sisters Corner. Just before the break, we were talking about Islamophobia, what the causes are, and what we were just starting to get into thinking about what we need to do to address some of that. And particularly, women are a very easy target. Muslim women are a very easy target for anti-Muslim hatred. So we really, I think it'd be useful if we had a little bit of a chat about what do we do to address those concerns with our Muslim sisters, but also generally about the empowerment of women.
I think it's firstly important to note that actually there are a huge amount of empowered Muslim women out there. I think that sometimes I feel like our default setting is empowered, but it's all of these daily kind of, aggressions and daily things that we face that kind of, don't necessarily let our confidence be displayed at the fullest level. So I think that, yes, we are absolutely empowered, but there are lots of challenges that we face that can stop that from happening, that can stop you from reaching your potential. So, one example of that is access, for example, internally within the Muslim community, is access to mosques, and those kinds of things. I know that we've been working specifically to MCB to look at what is the prophetic example of a mosque, and the prophetic example, the example of the Prophet, peace be upon him, was always access, open access, and and equality in terms of learning, sharing knowledge and praying and all of these things. That there always was that equality there, and I think that it's a huge shame that in today's society we've moved away from that. And there are places in the world, and there are places in the UK even where women don't have access to mosques. And not only that, sometimes if they don't have access, sometimes they'll have sometimes they won't even be present within the mosque in and of itself. So in terms of like leadership positions, so I think that's one of the practical things that we're trying to face and break down.
And it's in our Prophet's time, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure you'll know much more about this than I. The mosque was the centre of public life.
Yes.
It was a social space. It was a place where people went to talk about their issues and get help with, and think about the welfare of their community and society. And we don't have that here necessarily.
No, we don't. And I think that it's so important that we bring that back, that these social hubs, that's what our mosques are supposed to be. Children are supposed to be welcome, the elderly are supposed to be welcome, the disabled, women, people of all backgrounds and all ethnic backgrounds and all walks of life. It doesn't matter if you're on the wealthier side of things, it doesn't matter if you're struggling. This should be a place where you're able to come together, work out each other's problems, work out, come together and talk about difficult issues. And I think that we've kind of moved, like I said, away from that because of the kinds of lifestyles that we have here. And
in Britain we have a huge issue with loneliness.
Yes.
Which can actually have a bigger impact on your health than smoking or obesity.
Yeah.
And there's lots of research and lots of articles, so please do look that up. So actually, if you think about our Muslim communities, and our communities are changing as well. So we used to live in big family setups. Actually, more people are living in smaller families. People used to care for the elderly, everyone used to do it. Now fewer and fewer people are. Still lots of people are.
Yeah.
But then you also get people are working, so both parents are working, so they can't look after an elderly relative.
Yeah.
What does this elderly relative do? So if there's, can they go to a mosque? Yes, the man usually can. What does the lady do? She's sat at home quite often, isolated by herself. So I think there's just huge potential in that mosque community environment, and it's not about secluding Muslims away from the rest of the world. It's actually, the stronger you are in yourself and your identity, the more likely you are. Why can't Mrs. Smith at 96 go along with Mrs. Shah at 97 if they want to? Go there, have a cup of tea. If she doesn't, may not worship with Mrs. Shah, but they can accompany each other. That's my vision for these things. It's why, because we've got so many mosques dotted about. Similarly, as we have lots of churches, and that's a shame as well, because a lot of them are disused now as well. It's how do we make better use of this to address, and as Muslims we're supposed to address social evils, aren't we? And actually, if loneliness is, literally killing people, then we can do something about it in that way. The other thing, I think there's a little bit of hypocrisy, I should be careful about using that word, but a little bit of hypocrisy, that actually women contribute a lot to the building of these mosques financially. And I know it's a conversation I've had with shall I say, friends and family, where I said, if you can take women's money to build these mosques, and literally at fundraisers women give their gold, don't they? then why can't they be a part of at least attending the mosque, but ideally running the mosque, you know, for the benefit of everyone? It's not about women to the detriment of men, and that's not what you're proposing, and that's not something I would advocate. It's actually about how we work together as a society and, you know, address issues.
Yeah, so we've recently launched a Women in Mosques development program. Applications are open until April the 30th, so it's a great opportunity for women, because, you know, a lot of us are active outside the mosque. We're active in our local communities, we're active in our places of work, in social activism, in campaigning on lots of different causes, you know, lots of you know, fights against injustice. And even then, when we go to universities, colleges, we're involved in Islamic societies, we're running things, you know, we're running Islam Awareness Weeks, we're running campaigns. Again, very, very talented women are coming out of education and of our communities. There's a real, it's a real shame if we're not able to then give back to some of the most important institutions in our religion, to mosques. So that's why this program has been set up for women, you know, of any age, of any background, for, you know, to take part in mentorship, training, visiting mosques, and kind of, you know, kind of having, making a plan, you know, in the future, you want to go and become a member of a mosque management board, or you want to become a trustee, or you want to become someone who's, you know, instrumental in the running of a mosque, to make it a place where everyone can feel comfortable and everyone can come to pray.
Well, that sounds like a fascinating initiative, much very needed, actually. I know there's different ways to approach this, and lots of people, now more and more mosques are having their own space, but I have a friend who, one of her points around this is, it's not fair that if we go shopping, my husband can pop into any mosque and do his prayers and do it on time, whereas I have to go home and make mine up just because I'm not allowed in that space. So I think, you know, growing up, we heard all sorts of stuff that, you know, women weren't allowed to be in mosques, you know, if they'd started puberty. It's all tied up in lots of myth and, not stereotype, superstition, isn't it? And we need to do away with that, because that wasn't how it was in the Prophet's time. Absolutely.
Women were engaging, asking questions, interrupting khutbahs, you know, even question to the point where they were questioning and asking about revelation. You know, there are specific verses in the Quran that were kind of revealed after a woman asked why are women not addressed, and some of the most important points around prayer, around worship, around the good deeds. You know, it's men and women are addressed. Both are addressed in the Quran. So I think that there's no excuse really to be denying, you know, women their right to, you know, like you said, pray, their right to worship their Lord. And I think that if we do continue along that vein, the kinds of things that we'll all be responsible for on the Day of Judgment will be incredibly dire, I think, if we don't change that.
And the concept of ummah and the concept of community in Islam is huge, isn't it? And one of the things I feel is, so say for example, I'm fortunate and I can get out into lots of different areas and I have a sense of community in lots of different bits of my life. But actually, there may not be other people who do that. And as our families change, and you've got more single parent families, so you may have a mother raising a son who hasn't actually got any male relatives in her family. So where does that young man go to get positive role models? Where does he go to learn about, you know, the practices that are relevant to men particularly? You know, it's a weakness, I think. It's an absolute, I'm going to go as far as to say it's a flaw in our system, that we're not adapting quickly enough to the way our society, our community is changing. You know, and many women and men, some will marry again, some won't. So actually people make choices and families are operating differently.
No, definitely.
So it's a huge gap, I think. So I think if we can get more women and young people actually involved,
young people,
that would be huge. So that's a great initiative. I mean, the other thing that I wanted to bring us on quickly to is 2018, it's been 100 years since women received the vote.
Some women.
Women over 30, married with property. Which actually ruled out most people from a black and ethnic minority background, anyone from a poorer background, obviously. And then Sophia Dalip Singh, Princess, her campaigning and her leadership of the women's social, oh God, I forget the group name?
Yeah, I can't remember either.
Anyway, her leadership of the suffragettes,
Yes.
in the end, 10 years later, meant everybody got the vote.
Yeah.
And actually, what we were saying right at the beginning was, you know, change happens with one person complaining, one person saying it's not good enough, one person saying it's not fair, and we have that power within us.
Yeah.
And actually, Islamically, we're not supposed to put up with oppression, and we're not supposed to accept, you know, like the evils. I drive my family mad when I say this. Like, if you see something wrong, you have to do something about it.
Yeah.
It's not good enough, because like you say, we will all have to go and answer to our Lord.
Yeah.
Some people won't be in a position to, and that obviously will be factored in, but some of us actually have more opportunity, so we should make that work for us. But I just wanted to say, you know, over the next year, there's going to be a whole series of activities and events. So really, people should get out and about and get involved.
Yes.
You know, what do you think about women getting the vote 100 years, 90 years ago for everybody, or 100 years ago for some people?
I mean, I think it's a significant milestone, but I think it also reminds us how recently those rights were won. And I think for me, especially when, you know, going back to those people who are really racist and who do, you know, at me on Twitter, for example, and say, oh, you know, you're oppressed because you're a Muslim woman. You know, it's sometimes handy to remind them, well, you know, your society only gave, you know, women in this country the right to vote 100 years ago, so that's not really a long time ago. So I think it's a useful reminder, actually, that we think that we live in a society where, you know, women are equal, but actually the reality is incredibly different in terms of, you know, the statistics around domestic violence, you know, women's progression in employment, also the cases of, you know, equal pay, but, you know, the way women are exploited and used, you know, at the President's Club, for example, you know, women are, the way that the women are unable to speak out about abuse and harassment and the recent kind of outpouring of sentiment around, you know, Me Too and all of these kinds of things. I think it just shows that for a long, long time, people have thought, you know, that's it, women got the vote, that's it, they're sorted. You know, they're equal, like there isn't really anything more that needs to be done. But this year has been a real reminder, I think, to people that actually there's a huge long way to go yet. And that's even more so if you're a black woman, even more so if you're a Muslim, brown, you know, all of these kind of intersections.
If you're disabled, if you're LGBT, you know, all of those.
All of the intersections,
Yeah, they do add to that. And it's not, I mean, I'm not trying to depress us all here, but actually, it's the other thing we do have to remember, and this does irritate me when I think about, you know, when people compare Islam, we're a relatively young religion in comparison. And in terms of British Muslims, you know, people who are living here, we're growing our culture around us. It's developing and it's quite exciting. And I think it's a PhD, you know, research paper for someone actually on what and how we interact, because we've become a melting pot of lots of different cultures. There's no one Muslim, you know, it's everyone thinks when they say Muslim they're talking South Asian Muslim or they're talking Arab Muslim, but actually we've got Indigenous British Muslim, whatever that is. We've got converts, reverts, however you want to describe them. So it's quite exciting because it's all changing. And I had this debate with an Egyptian friend actually, and she was not happy about appropriation of certain language and things. And I was saying, well, that's interesting, because for me, all I see is people are working out their identity, and we're a little bit of a hodgepodge and a mishmash. And of course, we'll have Arabic and Urdu words side by side with English, and, you know, we'll create our own language, and that's quite exciting in and of itself. Excellent. So the other thing that I wanted to raise with yourself quickly was in terms of, we talked about we haven't really mentioned equal pay, but we also talk about the glass ceiling and women in employment. So we know generally that it's harder for women to get into senior positions, and once they're in those positions, it's harder to stay there because of the higher levels of expectations and burdens on them. What do we do about that?
I think support networks are really, really key. So ensuring that wherever you are at your stage in your career, in employment, wherever you are, that there's a group of people that you can constantly speak to, you know, use as sounding boards if you're going through something, if you feel like maybe you're being discriminated against, if you feel like you're not able to work to your full potential, that there are people that you can speak to about it, and they can help you, you know, work out what strategies are best to use in your specific environments. I think also you know, a lot of women often fall into the trap of pulling the ladder up behind them. So when they get to a certain position, it's kind of for them only, because there's this like really heightened sense of competition in a lot of spaces. And thankfully, I haven't come across that myself, but I know that there are lots of times where, you know, women won't support other women, you know, getting into the same places that they do. So I think ensuring that when you get into a place, take, you know, 10 other women with you. You know, you can start off with 1, 2, 3, you know, all of these kinds of things, so that, you know, firstly, you know, it's purely selfish, so that you're not alone, so that, you know, when if something does happen, that you can understand each other and each other's experiences, but also because we're never going to be able to make change with just one person alone. It's always a collective of people. There's so much power in unions, and a union, I think a union of women is one of the most radical and one of the most effective ways to change the world. And I think that's what we're trying to do.
And I think that's useful, but, you know, we're only one half of society, aren't you? So this is women.
Yes.
How do we work with our male colleagues? You know, and what's the role they have?
Absolutely, they have just as essential a role. Their role is around, you know, understanding the different levels of privilege that people have in society. It's understanding that their experience, and I direct this particularly at Muslim men. Muslim men sometimes think that that there is no room for women's rights, and there's no room for feminism, and there's no room for these discussions within Islam. I think that there needs to be a real acknowledgement on their behalf of what women actually go through, because it's one thing, you know, looking at theology and looking at how things should be, and then thinking that that's it. And it's another thing, actually speaking to women, knowing women, and knowing what they go through. And I think that's what spurs me particularly on to carry on this kind of work. But I feel like if people knew more, they would do a lot more. So we need a lot more sharing of information.
I have observed, you know, there are a lot more aware Muslim men, you know, that you'd come across in the workplace. But equally, you know, you come across people who don't think anything of speaking over you, speaking over other women, and that's coming from any background, actually. And some people will say, oh, of course I agree with women's rights, and of course everyone's equal, and then they absolutely refuse to let you get a word in sideways. You know, so it's kind of talking the talk, isn't it, but doing it. The other thing, I had this example a few months ago, this wasn't in Bradford, where we were talking about panels, all male panels, and how you share, and my question to this Asian Muslim male panelist, you know, and he was really good, he really was, very senior in the organisation he was in, and I was saying, well, why didn't you put forward your female colleague who you think could have done this as well, if not better than you? And that's what he was saying. And he said it's not his job to do that, because he wouldn't want to put her on the spot. But my question back was, but you have to give her the opportunity. You have to give her the chance to say no. And if she says no, fair enough. If she says yes, you help her. So it's about space, and that's the final point. I suppose we're going to have to move on quickly, as it's nearly time to finish, is men can help by creating space, by thinking how you use space, physical space, and actually emotional space as well, you know, and what we expect of women. And when you sit in a room and you think, oh, this looks wrong, because it's a room of 10 men making decisions for everybody, you need to address something. So any final thoughts from you, and how do people contact you if they want to know more about this Women's Leadership Project?
You can find out more at mcb.org.uk. You can find us on Twitter, you can find the website and find out lots of information about all the different streams of work that we've got going on around women at the moment. In terms of if you want to get in contact with me as well, you can find me on Twitter, usually writing something stupid. But you know, you can find my first name and last name on Twitter. And I think my final comment is just, I think that I think we can spend a lot of time, you know, recognizing and deciding what's wrong with society, but I think we need to invest just as much energy in changing it. So, you know, wherever you are, in whatever situation you're in, you can always affect some kind of change. And I think it would be a waste of our time on this earth, in this society, of our lives in general, if we didn't try to do something to change things for the generation to come. So please do join in, get involved, support the cause. I
keep saying, and I've said it so many times, life isn't a spectator sport. You're supposed to get involved. So on that note, I'd just like to say thank you so much for your time and coming to see us, and inshallah see you again soon, and good luck to you with all the initiatives. Viewers, do get involved, do get out in your society, and thank you so much for your time, and inshallah see you next week.